Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 513. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. You ready to do it?
Yeah.
All right, Beth, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Super excited to have as my guest today, Beth Sandlin. Beth, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Guy.
All right. So Beth offers support, education, and exploration to movers and teachers of the Pilates Method through a trauma-informed approach. While working as Assistant Director for Educational Services at a university health center, Beth realized the need for more inclusive, trauma-sensitive practices in all fields, especially within the movement sector. Beth is the founder of Trifecta Pilates, offering online Pilates classes via membership as well as YouTube. She also teaches the trauma-informed Pilates approach, continuing education course to current Pilates instructors to expand the network of trauma-informed professionals. Awesome. All right. So Beth, before we get started here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you're currently calling from, and then we'll get into it.
I'm originally from California, Southern California, and my husband always wanted to move out to Colorado. And so we moved out to Colorado probably, I don't know, a while ago by now, 2004 for me, a little bit sooner for him. So I've been residing and teaching in the Denver, Colorado area since about 2004.
Nice. All right. So let's dive into this here. Let's share with our listeners how you got into this. You know, that's kind of my interest, is how the heck you got into this field such that you're working through this trauma-informed approach. First of all, for those of us who don't know, what's Pilates? Break it down.
Thank you for letting me answer that question first, because it's one that a lot of people have, and because it has some similarities to yoga. Sometimes people can get it confused with yoga or just mush it in one category. And I am also a yoga teacher, so there's some crossover, but there's definitely differences. And there's a lot of different ways in which Pilates can be taught. A lot of times people really kind of resonate with the equipment. So there's very large pieces of equipment that people can go to a Pilates studio and work on. The equipment is really wonderful because it can provide not only a challenge in a unique way, but also additional support so people can release extra muscular tension and patterns that no longer serve them, thereby going deeper into other areas that are more effective. Stabilizers of exercises or mover of the body. And really the point of Pilates is not necessarily to get like to a level 3 exercise or more advanced exercise. It's so someone feels better in and about their body to move through daily life. So my specialty, even though I'm a comprehensive certified Pilates teacher, meaning I can teach on the equipment and taught in a Pilates studio for years, is I really like mat Pilates work. And one of the reasons why is because it's a lot more accessible to people. It's easier for them to do in their home. If people can do both mat Pilates work and work with the equipment, I think that's wonderful, and they really complement each other. But the mat Pilates work, it's kind of just like it's you and the mat, and it can be very humbling sometimes, can be very empowering. And I just know from working both personally with it and professionally, once people get it, right, like the essence are like, oh yeah, it's not about doing a more challenging exercise like the rollover. It's about feeling good and feeling in tune with how to best move with that exercise for them, which can be very different at the beginning of their Pilates journey, or even if they've been moving with Pilates for years, it can be different day to day because we all feel different day to day.
So is it a uh, an exercise? Is it a way of stretching? Is it all of those things?
It's all of those things.
Okay,
So
yeah.
when we think of physical fitness, there's four main components. There's cardiovascular work, there's strength work, there's mobility work, and balance work. Now we say Pilates will get you 3 out of the 4. We won't do cardiovascular work. It can get the heart rate up, but
Mm-hmm.
walking briskly, riding a bike, running, elliptical machine, rowing, whatever cardiovascular work someone likes to do, that's different than Pilates and the strength-based work, mobility, and balance. So one thing that I like and appreciate about a Pilates session, a well-rounded one, is that you can get all 3 of those components oftentimes in one exercise, let alone a well-formatted class as well. So if you have ever gone to a regular fitness class, usually how it will be formatted is they'll warm up a little bit first. They might do some light stretches. They'll get into the strengthening work, then maybe a little work a little bit on balance. And then at the end, they'll do a few brief stretches. Well, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the exercises within the Pilates method require all 3 of those components at one time, which makes it very interesting, very intriguing, very beneficial for the body, and at the same time can pose challenges because someone can come in who's very physically strong and they're like, why can't I do that exercise? It's like, oh, it's highlighting the mobility piece that we want to have. And if you just push through it, as oftentimes is more of a strength training component, like just push through, get one more rep in, your body's not going to be able to relax and mobilize in certain areas because they're physically bracing, which is also a protective mechanism as
Mm-hmm.
well. And so there's sometimes for other people, it could be the opposite with the same exercise. Maybe they're very mobile, but they need to work on the strength component of that particular exercise to really move efficiently with it.
Okay. So when did the trauma piece come in for you, and how did it come in for you? I know I read in your bio when you were working at the university system, you realized that the trauma informed approach, that lens needed to be more inclusive in a sense. Talk to us about that for you.
Yeah, so trauma is not something that most programs talk about in teacher training for Pilates, or I would say in yoga. And what's interesting is I actually started taking Pilates almost immediately after I experienced cancer at the age of 20. And
Wow.
it was a really challenging experience. I was inpatient for about a total of 3 months and then had 2 years of maintenance that I needed to have maintenance drug therapy. And I didn't realize at the time that that was a traumatic experience. It wasn't talked
Mm-hmm.
about in that way. And didn't realize that when I went back 5 years later to be part of a study that assessed why I was physically doing so well after having cancer, and they were doing a study, why do some people tend to do very well after cancer treatment and diagnosis, and others just are constantly fatigued and are dealing with problems from the original diagnosis and also the treatment, that the moment I walked in to the building, I just started crying. And I didn't know what that experience was. It's like, here I am, I'm physically doing well, but something's going on. And they never really addressed that in the study either. They just looked at my measurements, were all in the normal status, didn't ask much about mental health at that time. And so it was years later, once I left the Pilates studio and started teaching in the college health sector. I was still teaching Pilates mat work, but wanted to really focus on some different aspects of health and wellness, and to be honest, bring Pilates to people who couldn't afford to go to the studio or didn't have time to go to the Pilates studio. That I was working with another instructor who also is a director for a nonprofit, and she was talking to me about bringing in a trauma-informed yoga practice for the center she was working with. And I was really intrigued by that. And I started doing research about, okay, there's trauma-informed yoga, there must be trauma-informed Pilates. I was
Mm-hmm.
wrong. And I kept looking for years and years and years, and just
And when
personally,
was this?
this was like 2012, 2013. And so for years and years, I kept just looking for a certification or some continuing education specific for what I did, because I knew there were some nuances in Pilates that are different than yoga that needed to be addressed in how we teach and our best practices. So as I continued working with other organizations, I just dove into this topic a little bit more personally and professionally. And it was the turning point, I would say, was when with the director of behavioral health, I was co-facilitating transgender healthcare protocol. I was more of facilitating the group meetings, taking notes of the group meetings, compiling all the information, outreaching to certain organizations to make sure that we're including the right people in this protocol. And then one of the forums, someone had mentioned that a medical provider went to touch them, and they were with their partner, and the person's response was, don't medical providers know that people experience trauma, and therefore it could really affect if or how they're touched? And the director of behavioral health, amazing person, he said, to be honest, this is not covered in medical or much in behavioral health, at least when he was getting going through all of his classes and education. And it was this aha, like, we touch people all the time in Pilates without a second thought. And I really started to evaluate, what is the benefit of that? Are there other ways? What are other ways in which I'm teaching in a way that's not inclusive to everyone? And it was really through evaluating more of the, I would say, the challenges that I had with clients, or where I doubted myself as a Pilates teacher, that I realized it was education, everything beyond the mechanics of Pilates to be a good teacher, that I needed to focus on. So that's when I took an even deeper dive into a trauma-informed approach and started changing my personal best practices. And in turn, what I noticed is the experience became more empowering and validating for the people who were taking my classes. They took more ownership over the experience.
Okay, let me interrupt you for a second there. So you're saying a lot of stuff that I want to unpack. So first of all, you said in Pilates, you and many, I guess, teachers, facilitators touch people all the time. Can you talk about, have you had experiences where you did touch someone and they were like, you realized maybe they were uncomfortable, or they said something, or you felt they were uncomfortable?
Most people will not say anything. That's one of the myths, right? So I've talked to a lot of Pilates teachers and people who have taken Pilates, and from Pilates teachers to just people who love Pilates and never want to be a teacher, just want to take Pilates. They have had negative interactions in which they have told me only because I'm speaking about this, and not ever told the teacher. Or what happened with one person I can particularly think about, went to a class, never went back. And the teacher thought that she was getting consent because she asked, I use touch to teach, is that okay? Well, both her and her friend had said yes, but they didn't realize what they were consenting into, which is part of what I teach and talk about, that some person's form of touch could be arm, but we will touch the pelvis sometimes, touch the buttocks for rotation. And this person who was recounting the story to me said, why didn't you just tell me what to do rather than just use touch? And so the intention of the touch, I understand that we're trying to facilitate and help people move optimally. However, there's another way that I think is better, not only for the client, but is also better for the teacher as well, because then the client takes ownership over the experience in a way that is very best for them.
Right. Okay. Now, as you're saying that, I'm also thinking just about the healing aspects of touch. So you're not saying that trauma informed means not touching.
Correct. I'm
Okay.
not saying that.
Right.
And that's something that when I say, do you get full consent to touch? Do you really talk someone through it? Is it clear that someone can opt out and you give unbiased example of each, of touching or not touching, or are you leading them towards wanting to touch?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying don't. I'm saying we
Right.
need to evaluate our best practices and how we approach this. Do we need to, on the very first session, touch someone in the pelvic area or on the buttocks? My answer at this point is no. I think that takes a little bit more time. We need to establish that safety and trust for someone because we don't know
Right.
their background. And something that I get from Pilates teachers sometimes who are newer to understanding a trauma-informed approach, they'll say, we're not counselors. I said, you're right, we're not, which is even more so how we will never know someone's full story and never know someone's comfort level if we aren't asking in the proper way with how, if they're comfortable with touch. And this is the thing that it was 2 or 3 years ago, I was talking with a counselor we were having this conversation, and she was just mentioning that people will give you the answer you want to hear
Mm.
unless you are really strategic and ask in a way that is non-leading. And unless we take the time to understand that, we'll continue to ask, most likely in a leading way, because
Give us an
it's best
example of what that would
practices.
look like.
In a leading way would be, I use touch to teach. Are you okay with that?
Right.
Okay, well,
Excuse
now
me.
here's a person of power. I don't care what a Pilates teacher says, they don't have power. We do, because we're the Pilates teacher, someone's coming to us, right? We know the knowledge. There's a power dynamic. We're trying to even it out. So if we say it in that way, we're leading someone. In a group class as well, I think it's even more challenging to have this conversation, in particular because maybe you're filling in for someone else. And if you come up to someone, they're laying down, and you come up to them and you say, I'm going to adjust your leg, is that okay? Like, not a lot of people are going to say, no, it's not okay. And so a
Right.
far better way to do it, if it's a group class, have a blanket statement in the beginning and allow someone to opt out in a private way. Oftentimes this can be laying on their back, and they can look up to the ceiling and just like raise an arm or a leg. There are consent cards that people can flip over, like, yes, adjustments are okay. No, I do not want to be adjusted, and they can change throughout the class. Some studios use those. They're more prevalent in yoga studios than in Pilates studios. I say have it very clear on the website, to the intake forms, followed up by a conversation.
Mm.
And on the form, the best practices that I like to use is just 2 statements. I prefer verbal cues only. I prefer verbal cues and tactile touch. And if someone checks either box, then you follow up with a conversation just to dive a little bit deeper into that.
Wow. This is really kind of interesting, the way how much depth you've gone into. Are you saying that you're one of the first people to integrate this or bring this to Pilates?
Yes. I'm saying yes, in a formalized way. There
Mm-hmm.
have been a lot of people who have intuitively done this. And what I have realized is those most often who have intuitively done this have been those Pilates teachers who have been very uncomfortable with their training because of their traumatic history, like opting out of teaching certain exercises, the way we teach, where we stand in relation to the client. And these are not conversations that are typically had at this point. In the future, hopefully they'll be had in primary training as well. And so it's challenging because Pilates comes from a lineage of ensuring that people are moving safely with the exercise, but that also implies doing it right or wrong. So sometimes people are like, I've been teaching wrong. And I always say, no, 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 no. You haven't been teaching wrong. You just haven't been teaching in a trauma-informed way. And we can adapt and change best practices based upon new knowledge that maybe we weren't taught or didn't even know about when the method was created.
Going back to one of the comments you said, someone made, well, I'm not a clinician, I'm not a therapist. Have you encountered people who, teachers, facilitators who feel, oh my God, this is, I have to get into this now. This, because trauma's heavy duty, right? It's a whole other can of worms in a sense. I don't know if I can deal with this. It's even for therapists, right? Because you're potentially encountering opening up your own trauma.
Yeah, I mean, I have had people who have gone through the course, and the coursework that I teach is different modules. And my suggestion is that they take it at least week by week to give it time to digest and integrate before moving on. And even with that, someone said, I just had to stop because I was so triggered. By it. And I understand that, because in order to be trauma informed, you do need to have a baseline information of all the types of trauma. And I'll just give my personal example. When I got into this, I thought, I was working with the interpersonal violence office in particular a lot at the university. And so my into trauma-informed practices were really from interpersonal violence, sexual assault, abuse, and that's what my frame of reference for trauma was.
Mm-hmm.
And then I opened that door a little bit more. It's like, oh, okay, there's so much more there. And then I went back and it's like, okay, I've experienced certain traumas, even though I had post-traumatic growth. And at the same time, when I looked back at the incidences that weren't positive for clients I worked with or myself, it was always due to some sort of trauma that I could identify either for myself or the client. I just didn't know what it was. And I thought, oh, if I just would have known this a little bit beforehand, that would have really helped in a lot of different situations. But the best thing that I can do now is turn that into lessons learned, and change my personal practice as a Pilates teacher, and also support other Pilates teachers in their work.
So let me just reintroduce you here. Speaking with Beth Sandlin, we're talking about Pilates and trauma-informed approach. She is the founder of Trifecta Pilates. I don't know why I'm saying Pilates or Pilates, but okay. So what do you do? You're offering online courses, in person. I mean, now probably not, or maybe you are. But what specifically are you doing? Are you teaching?
So it was probably 2 years ago, I made the intentional shift to, as much as possible, transfer everything to 100% online. My main job has always been a Pilates instructor. I had a stint University Health, still working in Pilates, just in a different capacity. But when I was particularly a younger Pilates teacher, I didn't have the money to go to a training out of state. And I didn't have the time away from my kids to be able to do that. So because I had that personal experience of really wanting to be able to take advantage of trainings that I couldn't attend because of going out of state, hotel fare, hotel fee, all that. So this is going to be online so that I could work with people from where I am, no matter where they are. And it works out well, because another advantage of being online and not live, trust me, there's advantages to live, but the advantage of not live, at least the way I've set it up, is that it's all online, it's modules, and as I update, because information changes and updates need to be made, whether based on new research or findings from a trauma-informed perspective, whether it's feedback from people who have gone through the course, I can make those updates and people can tap back into the coursework as a refresher. So that's one thing that I really value about having online programs, is that it can be updated very easily and you don't have to go out of state again or commute elsewhere.
Very cool. One of the things that struck me in your reading your bio, you talked about realizing the need for more inclusive, trauma-sensitive practices in all fields, especially within the movement sector. Movement meaning dance, yoga, every all movement.
All movement.
Yeah.
So it really, the trauma-informed approach really, as far as I know, started with a yoga approach in the yoga community. But I have talked to fitness trainers. There was one fitness trainer in particular who was a college professor where I worked in the kinesiology coursework. And she was embedding some of this into the coursework she was teaching for personal trainers, for group fitness instructors, for the physically adaptive classes as well, because she had a negative experience in what was it? Some sort of martial arts class. She had a very, very negative experience. And so she just wanted from that negative experience to call it out to students who she was training about how to use touch, if you should use touch, and just be more informed about it. So yes, all movement practices. I don't work in the dance community. It's needed there, I would say though, as well. So anytime that we're moving with a body or teaching a body movement, inevitably trauma may be triggered.
All right. So what's the best way for people to get in touch with you, Beth?
Yeah, so they can get in touch with me on social platforms. I'm on Facebook at Trifecta Pilates, on Instagram at Trifecta Pilates and Trauma Informed Pilates. You can reach out via website, trifectapilates.com. And I'm also on YouTube as well as a way to get Pilates into more people's homes through Mat Pilates.
Okay. And do you offer who are these workshops for? These trauma-informed workshops for facilitators and teachers? Do you also offer just online Pilates classes?
So there's two components. There's like an educational component and a movement component. So the educational component of trauma-informed Pilates approach is for Pilates professionals who want more information and start to work in a trauma-informed way while they teach Pilates. And I found for a lot of Pilates teachers, they're already doing some aspects, but the beauty is once you've gone through coursework, you can be even more intentional about maybe intuitive shifts that they've had over the course of time. And then there's, I work with everyone from Pilates teachers to people who are just starting out with their Pilates journey, either via YouTube, or I have a membership option as well, which just allows more structure and support where I can do group Q&A calls with people and live classes. So it's really a wide umbrella of who I work with.
Awesome. All right. How about a go-to book recommendation, whether Pilates related or not, or trauma related or not? What do you have?
I'm going to do two. I decided not to do a Pilates specific one just because I felt like for your audience, it might be helpful. So my Grandmother's Hands is an awesome book. I think really relevant right now. A lot of deep dive into personal work. And because it's talking about trauma may be triggering for people. I think that just goes along with any information about that. And the other one is a recent read, Talking to Strangers. Really good book, helped me reevaluate some assumptions that we've been fed about nonverbal communication in particular.
Very cool. So My Grandmother's Hands and then Talking to Strangers. I don't think I've ever heard of either of those, but we'll definitely have those linked up here at the show notes page at the Trauma Therapist podcast.com. Awesome. Well, so appreciate you coming on here. Like I think I said when we initially started communicating, I think you're probably the first Pilates person that's been on here, and I love what you're doing. I think it's awesome and inspiring. I mean, just taking the lead and opening up the issue of being trauma informed, especially within the movement sector, is awesome.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, we'll talk soon. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.